Welcome back. I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. A second round of peace talks have begun between Ukrainian and Russian negotiators in Belarus. France also says its President Emanuel Macron spoke to Vladimir Putin on the phone for an hour and a half today, pushing for an end to the fighting. A French government source tells ABC that after that call, President Macron now believes, quote, the worst is yet to come. Russian forces claim to have seized the major city of Kherson in southern Ukraine and appear to have other cities surrounded. Video circulating online shows destruction in downtown Kharkiv in northern Ukraine. Verified dashcam footage posted to social media also captures two large explosions hitting residential buildings in another northern city. More video online shows explosions in the sky over the capital city of Kyiv overnight. And the International Criminal Court is now investigating evidence of Russian war crimes with more reports of civilian areas targeted. Our senior foreign correspondent Ian Pennell reports from Kyiv.
Escalating. Videos circulating online, verified by ABC News, showing Ukrainian civilians increasingly in the crossfire. Parts of this vast country are being laid to waste by this brutal invasion. Bombed out streets, homes leveled, and emergency workers desperately searching for survivors. The Ukrainian military trying to hold on to the country's second largest city, Kharkiv, which has been mercilessly shelled for days. Western intelligence sources show 5 major Ukrainian cities almost encircled by Russian forces. President Zelensky addressing the nation, claiming as many as 9,000 Russian forces have been killed, saying, we are a nation that broke the enemy's plans in a week. We stopped them. We beat them. But that number, much higher than the Russian claim of 498 dead troops. As in all wars, it's innocent civilians who are suffering the most. 1 million people now driven from their homes and their land. Ukrainian officials saying more than 2,000 have been killed in the Russian advance. The International Criminal Court launching an investigation into possible war crimes. In the capital, we go inside the country's largest children's hospital, where the patients, the children, have been moved to the basement amid fears an attack could come at any moment.
You can see it's full of kids who need care and are having to hide down here for their own safety.
Some patients have been moved out of the country for safety, but others, like 2-year-old David, who needs dialysis, can't be moved. But amid the desperation, there is still hope. Diane, although some children are now being moved out of that hospital, some of them have been taken across the border into Poland for their own safety and for treatment. Some of them, of course, can't be moved out of the hospital because they can't be disconnected from the treatment that they're currently getting. And, you know, even though President Biden has ruled this out, this is why the Ukrainians are appealing once again to America and NATO to enforce a no-fly zone across the country. Diane?
All right, Ian Pennell for us in Kyiv. Ian, thank you. And let's bring in senior investigative reporter Aaron Katursky, who's in Lviv, Ukraine, along with ABC's Elizabeth Schulze in Washington for more on this. Aaron, you just heard Ian Pennell. He actually just left a secret press conference with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, where he was asked how long he thinks Ukraine can hold out. So what's the latest on that?
And the president gave a very frank assessment. I don't know. And there really is no telling how long the Ukrainian military can hold out against the superior Russian forces. They may have been slowed down. They may not have counted on a convoy that's been menacing Kyiv from the north for several days, stalling as it has. But still, eventually, the Russians are going to make inroads, as they have, it seems today, taking Kherson, the strategic port city in the southeastern part of the country, now seemingly under Russian control, even though the local mayor says he's still there to help the city run. He's taking orders from Russian troops. And they are also bombarding Mariupol, another strategic port city, in a seeming effort to cut off the country from its access to the Black Sea. They've been bombarding Kharkiv, and we've heard from local officials that a number of private homes have been damaged or destroyed, so civilians are coming under intense assault, and it's causing the fastest migration that the United Nations can remember in recent history. 1 million people in 1 week's time have crossed an international border.
And Elizabeth, French President Emmanuel Macron had this lengthy phone call with Putin today, and a government source there says that he now thinks the worst is yet to come. So do we know anything else about that call and why Macron said that?
Not a promising message, Diane, from French President Emmanuel Macron. We know that this call lasted an hour and a half. A source, as you say, tells us that he expected the worst is yet to come after that conversation, specifically warning about the risk that this conflict spreads beyond Ukraine. President Putin, the French government says, is repeating his claims for justifying this attack. And I've got to say, Diane, looking at the readout from the Kremlin, it's almost like it was an entirely separate phone call. The Kremlin said that the Russian armed forces are doing everything possible to preserve the lives of peaceful citizens. They say that is what President Putin told President Macron. Clearly a very different message than what Aaron is describing there on the ground.
And Aaron, there's also a second round of peace talks underway between Russian and Ukrainian negotiators. So what's on the agenda there, and are there any signs that this could actually produce results?
It seems so incongruous to call them peace talks, given what we've been witnessing on the ground here across different cities in Ukraine. But the groups are meeting in Belarus with hopes of working something out, though there really isn't any common ground on which to build. The Russians insist they want to demilitarize Ukraine. That sounds like they want to pledge that Ukraine will not join NATO. And the Ukrainians say they're not going to capitulate to that demand. They want a ceasefire, or at the very least, they want to open up some humanitarian corridors to get badly needed aid into the eastern part of the country.
And Elizabeth, Russia's State Space Corporation announced that it will suspend exports of Russian-made rocket engines to the United States. Now, the U.S. and Russia have partnered on space exploration for decades now, and there are even Russian and American astronauts working together on the International Space Station right now. So how is this conflict affecting that aspect of the relationship?
Well, Diane, this is no doubt an eerie parallel to the Cold War here. And this statement from Russian State Space Agency was blunt, saying that let the U.S. fly on something else. We are going to be freezing out our shipments. Now, a few days ago, NASA had said that the export controls that the U.S. is putting in place on Russia, it would not affect this relationship. We're waiting to hear on NASA's response to this latest announcement. But it is important to also remember that this is part of a broader cooperation with multiple countries, not just with Russia. Diane.
All right, Aaron Katursky, Elizabeth Chelsea, we appreciate it. Thank you. Meanwhile, as we mentioned, over 1 million people have fled Ukraine in just 7 days, and that number is increasing every single day. According to the UN, more than half of those refugees are seeking safety in Poland. Phil Lipoff joins us live from Lublin, Poland, with a look at what's happening there. And Phil, by these estimates, Poland has now taken in over 500,000 refugees. So can you walk us through the kind of help you're seeing the country provide them with?
Absolutely, Diane. Poland is a country that is very familiar with its Ukrainian neighbors. There are about 2 million Ukrainians already living here in Poland. And so when these 500,000 Ukrainian refugees cross the border, some are going to family and friends, some are going to need much more help from the country. Poland was preparing before the first Russian missiles were ever fired. There are 123 reception centers all across this country, some very close to the border crossings. And remember, Poland shares probably the largest, not probably, the largest border with Ukraine. And so that's one of the reasons why we're seeing so many refugees this way. But at those reception centers, they're doing things like handing out blankets, a small gesture, to actually pairing refugees up with families here in Poland who want to help. And there are so many people who are opening up their homes and their hearts to help the Ukrainian refugees.
And I know you met one of these refugee families this morning. Can you share their story with us?
Yeah, Diane, it's impossible to go anywhere here in Lublin, which is an hour and a half from the Dorhusk border crossing, without finding a Ukrainian refugee family. And we didn't even leave our hotel this morning. We were on our way out to go to a shoot, and we met this family inside. The reason why we met them is because the 19-year-old son, Vlad, was playing a piano in our hotel. The piano hasn't been played since we've been here, and it caught our attention. We looked. He's 19 years old. So we met his family. Oksana there is his mother, his sister Anastasia. They left their father in Ukraine, and they are here. And Anastasia is 22. She left her fiance over in Ukraine. They were supposed to get married 4 days. Their wedding date was 4 days after the bombing started. She doesn't know when she's going to see him now. And worse than that, Oksana told us about her sister, who is over in Ukraine right now, hiding in a basement with her 3-year-old son, who has been describing the war very vividly, talking about helicopters and bombs, Diane.
Amazing to hear a child that young describing in the detail that you told us about. And Phil, this is also you saw how upset Oksana was, so much so that I know that she ended the conversation with you at some point because she kind of couldn't keep it together. So this is clearly taking a mental and emotional toll on these people, understandably so. So how are they handling that, and what resources are available for them on that front?
Well, resources, I'm not sure. I'll get to that in a minute. How they're handling it, Diane, I've met so many Ukrainian refugees over the last 2 weeks. What I have learned just personally about the Ukrainian people is the folks I have met are incredibly strong. We're seeing that inside the country as well with how they're fighting off the Russians. But I'm meeting the women and children who are coming across the border. And you mentioned Oksana. One of the things she said to us before the end of our interview was, I would give my own life. She said, I would die to get other women and children out of Ukraine. As long as my kids are safe here, I want to go back in, and I want to get more people out. I would give my life, she said, because my life is nothing right now.
Incredible. And Phil, the regional government there is now on a heightened alert. Can you tell us more about that?
I can. It's called a Code Bravo. Here and you said regional, it's right. Lublin, the city I'm in, went to Code Bravo and the region around it, not all of Poland. But it's a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest alert, and Code Bravo is a 2. So what does that mean for the average citizen in this region? Really nothing. Some of the military folks have to do things like, put on their vests, up armor a little bit. Businesses have to close at a certain time, and I wanted to mention this to you, Diane, because you asked about what that means. 15 minutes from where I am right now is a museum at the site of a former concentration camp, Majdanek, and that museum had to close yesterday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon because of that Code Bravo. And remember, it was just the day after that tower and the Holocaust Museum in Ukraine was hit by missiles.
All right, so they're definitely on alert there. Phil Lipoff and Lublin Polis for us. Phil, stay safe, and thanks for bringing us these stories. Coming up, the U.S. is intensifying economic pressure on Vladimir Putin and his inner circle. Hear how that could impact what happens next in Ukraine when we come back. Welcome back. The U.S. is intensifying economic pressure on Vladimir Putin and his inner circle, now threatening to seize the assets of any Russian oligarch. So what do we know about Putin's wealth, his inner circle, and how could that impact what happens next in Ukraine? James Longman is in Moscow with more.
As the West tries to squeeze Vladimir Putin, sanctioning those closest to him, attention is turning to his inner circle and their money, shrouded in secrecy. And Putin is thought to be one of the richest men in the world, but proof is hard to find on paper, while the Kremlin claims he makes around $140,000 a year. Experts believe he's worth billions and say that his real wealth is hidden in the accounts and assets of his oligarchs.
He's smart enough not to store money in his name. How does it work? Through his friends who pretend to call themselves businessmen or oligarchs, only that they're just Putin's wallets. It is mafia.
Leonid Volkov works with Russian dissident Alexei Navalny to expose corruption. Their video showing Putin's palace, an enormous property they say belongs to Putin but isn't registered under his name, getting more than 122 million views.
There are 20-something palaces in Russia. So this palace on the Black Sea, probably one of the largest palaces in the world.
Navalny's group publishing hundreds of photos of what they claim is inside. A theatre, opulent bedrooms, even an ice rink. The cost believed to be around $1.4 billion. Navalny, who was poisoned in 2020 and is now imprisoned awaiting trial, called this palace the world's largest bribe. And it's not just Putin's wealth that's a mystery. His family also hidden from the public eye. The Russian president was married to a former flight attendant, Lyudmila Skrebneva, for 30 years before divorcing in 2013. He described their roles to Barbara Walters in 2001.
America's first ladies play a certain public role. Does your wife play a public role here in your country?
Our traditions are a little bit different from the American ones. My wife does not seek any public positions. In fact, I was elected president, not her.
Walter's also asking about the way his wife saw him.
You described yourself as calm, yes, intense. Your wife called you intense.
Well, she should be the judge of that. I think it is no point arguing with a woman.
They reportedly share two daughters, who Putin has never publicly identified: Maria, a genetic scientist, and Katerina, an academic, whose passions include performing in acrobatic rock and roll competitions. Putin has rarely spoken about them.
He's very, very deeply rooted in this KGB culture of making everything secret. He's a paranoid old terrorist who poisoned and tried to kill my friend, who poisoned and killed many other people, and who now started a war against our neighboring country just for no reason at all.
Dan, there are more concerns about the kind of country Russia is going to become. Tomorrow, the parliament will debate a law about what they call fake news. That will further target media in Russia who are seeking to give a balanced view of what's really happening in Ukraine. Dan?
All right, James Longman from Moscow. Thanks, James. And a White House official tells ABC News the U.S. is expected to announce new sanctions against Russian oligarchs today. Meanwhile, U.S. allies are even seizing super yachts belonging to oligarchs in European ports. French authorities say they've seized a yacht in southern France belonging to the director of the Russian oil company Rosneft. And Forbes reports Germany seized a $600 million yacht owned by a Russian industrial magnate. Let's bring in Paul Massaro, a senior policy advisor for the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, for more on this. Paul, thanks for being here. President Biden created a task force to go after Russian oligarchs. So what is the administration hoping to accomplish with that?
So this task force is really something extraordinary, something we've been pushing for a very long time. This task force is a group of a lot of different law enforcement agencies in the country. It's going to work across borders, use civil asset forfeiture and criminal authorities to crack down on these oligarchs, these corrupt billionaires who are part of Putin's regime, who live in the West and undermine our system from within.
Now, what role do these oligarchs play in the Russian government? What separates them from just rich people in Russia?
Well, in a sense, they are the rich people in Russia. Russia is actually one of the most economically unequal places on earth, massive wealth inequality. It's been said there are no millionaires in Russia, only billionaires, and these are those billionaires. The Russian state is made up of sort of Putin's elites, who are kind of the government officials around him, what are called the Siloviki security services. These are the individuals who push people out windows and poison people. As I saw Leonid Volkov just said, one of Leonid Volkov, of course, who works for with Alexei Navalny, and then the oligarchs who actually live abroad and are Putin's sort of eyes and ears abroad. They are in our system, working to subvert our commerce, subvert our democratic process, subvert the rule of law from within.
So are they offering any reaction to having things like their yachts seized?
Yeah, I mean, they are. They are scared. They have made statements, nothing immediately critical of Putin. I think they're tiptoeing around that, being very careful, but saying that the war must end, war is bad, that sort of thing. But ultimately, what it's going to take is a continued crackdown and forcing these individuals to sleep in the bed they've made, force them to live in the oppressive system they've created in Russia. And then maybe they'll start thinking, wow, perhaps Putin has gone a step too far.
Now, do these oligarchs have any real power over Putin? What's the end game here?
Yes, they do. I mean, they're part of the Russian elite. They're part of sort of these three circles that run the Putin state. And their job is really to be abroad. Their job is to be Putin's wallets, to be Putin's voice in the West. So when you force them to go back and live in Russia, they can no longer do that job, but they're also denied the luxurious lifestyles, and also, maybe most importantly, the independence from Putin that they've enjoyed. So suddenly they are much more vulnerable to Putin's expropriation, to Putin's attacks, and so on and so forth. And that's when maybe they start thinking, well, maybe Russia should be run in a different way.
And so what do they do with that? Even if they all think that, what happens in a government run the way Russia's is?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the question. Can Putin come around? Can these individuals exert influence upon Putin? Can they exert influence upon the Siloviki? Can they exert influence upon the elites? Can they sort of change Putin's course? Or at the end of the day, is it going to take a different government in Russia?
All right, Paul Massaro, we appreciate the analysis, Paul. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Coming up, the Supreme Court has cleared the way for Kentucky's Republican Attorney General to defend a controversial abortion law. More on that when we come back. Welcome back to ABC News Live. We are following the latest developments in Russia's war on Ukraine, but here are some of the day's other top stories as well. For the first time, the House committee investigating the January 6th Capitol attack is laying out a potential criminal case against former President Trump. The committee says it has evidence that Trump and some of his associates may have illegally tried to obstruct Congress's count of electoral votes and, quote, engaged in criminal conspiracy to defraud the United States in their attempt to overturn the 2020 election results. Representatives for Trump did not respond to ABC News' request for comment. The Supreme Court ruled today that Kentucky's Attorney General can move ahead with defending the state's controversial abortion law. The law, which bans abortions after 15 weeks, has been held up by courts since 2018. It's separate from a case the court is considering out of Mississippi, which could roll back Roe v. Wade. The court also bolstered the government's right to keep state secrets in a ruling that effectively quashed a 9/11 detainee's bid to compel 2 CIA contractors to testify about his alleged torture. The opinion, authored by Justice Stephen Breyer, reverses a lower court ruling that would have allowed attorneys for that al-Qaeda suspect, who was held without charge at Guantanamo Bay for decades, to obtain depositions for use in a case overseas. And up to 500,000 Australians are under evacuation orders as severe storms batter Sydney and the nation's east coast. At least 13 people have been killed since the intense rain started a week ago. This is the second year in a row of record-setting rain, and conditions are expected to remain unstable for the next 24 to 48 hours. I'm Diane Macedo. Do stay with us as ABC News Live continues with news, context, and analysis.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.